The shuttle descended through the crystalline towers of Upper Cygnus, its gilded exterior catching the light of 3 suns. Inside, Lady Lyra Volantis stared out the viewport with practiced indifference, her pale fingers tapping impatiently against the plush seating. Another boring day in the life of the governor's daughter. "My lady, we're approaching the private landing pad," announced the pilot, his voice artificially modulated to sound pleasing. Like everything else in her father's domain, even the staff were engineered for perfection. Lyra sighed, adjusting her iridescent dress that shifted colors with her movements, the latest fashion from the orbital boutiques. At 19 standard years, she had everything a young woman of her station could desire, yet felt imprisoned by the very luxury that defined her life. "Inform my father I'll be taking dinner in my quarters," she said, not bothering to look at the attendant who materialized at her side. "The governor has requested your presence at tonight's diplomatic reception, my lady," the attendant replied, voice carefully neutral. Lyra finally turned, fixing the woman with a cold stare she'd learned from her father. How unfortunate for him. The upper city of Cygnus X-7 was a marvel of engineering and genetic manipulation, where the elite displayed their status through increasingly exotic and unique living possessions. Pets, they called them, though they bore little resemblance to the companion animals of old Earth. Designer creatures with glittering scales, multiple limbs, psychic empathy, or bioluminescent features that complemented their owners' residences were all the rage. The more rare and impossible the creature, the higher the status it conveyed. Lyra had owned dozens, each more spectacular than the last, and each had bored her within days. They were all the same beneath their engineered exteriors, docile, obedient, and empty of any real personality, just like everyone else in her life. That evening, rather than attending her father's reception, she slipped away to the lower city markets. Disguised in a hooded cloak that concealed her distinctive platinum hair and violet eyes, genetic markers of the Volantis line, she navigated the crowded streets with a freedom she never felt in the sterile upper city. The black market existed in the shadows of the gleaming towers, in spaces ignored by the surveillance systems her father's security forces controlled. Here, the forbidden and the dangerous changed hands for astronomical sums. "Lady Volantis," whispered a voice from a shadowy alcove. An unexpected pleasure. Lyra tensed, her hand moving to the small disruptor concealed in her sleeve. "You're mistaken. I'm not. Please." The figure emerged, revealing a woman with scaled skin and eyes that reflected light like a cat's. "Mila knows all who enter her domain, even daughters of governors who play at rebellion." Lyra relaxed slightly, but didn't lower her guard. "I'm looking for something unique, something my father's collectors haven't been able to acquire." Mila's lips curved into a smile. "How fortunate. I received something that might interest you. A specimen from the newly subjugated primitive world. Earth, they call it. Earth specimens aren't rare," Lyra said dismissively. "Half the nobles have them." "Not like this one," Mila's voice dropped. "This one was captured during the resistance. A leader, they say, dangerous enough that your father's forces placed a neural suppressor on him before transportation." Lyra's interest peaked. "A male of their species. Strong, intelligent, and most importantly, unique in temperament. The neural suppressor prevents higher cognitive functions and speech, of course, but there's something in his eyes." Mila trailed off. "Would you like to see?" The price Mila named was exorbitant, even by Lyra's standards. But something about the dealer's description intrigued her. A pet that had once been dangerous, that might have some spark of defiance left. It was the most interesting prospect she'd encountered in years. "I'll take him," Lyra decided, transferring the funds. "Have him delivered to the east service entrance of the governor's residence." Discreetly. Convincing her father was another matter entirely. Governor Terrius Volantis ruled Cygnus X-7 with an iron will and cold calculation. His private chambers, decorated with artifact from a dozen conquered worlds, reflected his ambition and power. "Absolutely not," he said, barely glancing up from his data screens. "An Earth resistance fighter? Have you lost your mind, Lyra?" "He's completely neutralized," she argued. The neural suppressor can malfunction, her father cut her off, or be tampered with. On board, father, Lyra admitted, a rare moment of honesty between them. Everything here is so controlled. At least this specimen might be interesting before the suppressor wiped his personality completely. The governor studied his daughter for a long moment, seeing perhaps a reflection of his own restless ambition. Finally, he sighed. Security protocols will be doubled. Commander Forlag will personally oversee the installation of additional safeguards. And, at the first sign of trouble, the specimen will be terminated. Are these terms acceptable? Lyra contained her excitement behind a mask of casual interest. If you insist on such excessive precautions, yes. 3 days later, Lyra stood in her private suite as 2 security officers escorted her new acquisition inside. The man, for he did indeed look remarkably human, stood nearly a head taller than the officers, his muscular frame evident despite the simple gray coverall he wore. His skin was tanned, his dark hair cropped short in the standard prisoner style. Around his neck was a metallic collar, the neural suppressor, but it was his eyes that captured Lyra's attention. Deep blue and clear, they lacked the vacant stare of most pets. Instead, they assessed the room with deliberate focus before settling on her. There was recognition there, not of her specifically, but of her type, of power and privilege. "Leave us," she ordered the officers. "My lady," Commander Forlag instructed. "Leave us," she repeated, her tone making it clear she wouldn't ask again. When they reluctantly departed, Lyra circled her new possession slowly. "They tell me your name is Kalen," she said, though she knew he couldn't understand or respond with the suppressor active. "Welcome to your new home." Those blue eyes followed her, and for a moment, Lyra felt an unfamiliar sensation, as though she were the one being evaluated and found wanting. The reception to showcase Lyra's new acquisition was a glittering affair. The elite of Cygnus X7 gathered in the governor's grand hall, adorned in their finest attire and accompanied by their most impressive living possessions. Lyra had dressed Kalen in tailored black attire that accentuated his physique while maintaining the aesthetic of servitude. The neural suppressor gleamed against his throat like an obscene piece of jewelry. "Quite the specimen," remarked Lady Ellison, her own pet, a serpentine creature with feathered wings, curled around her shoulders. "Though rather plain-looking for an Earth native, isn't he? I thought you'd choose something more exotic." "The exotic grows tiresome," Lyra replied, sipping her luminescent cocktail. "There's something to be said for classical forms." Throughout the evening, Kalen stood silently behind her chair, his presence drawing curious glances and hushed comments. Lyra found herself unusually aware of him, of the steady rhythm of his breathing, of the heat radiating from his body when she stood close. Governor Volantis addressed the gathering, speaking of recent conquests and the expansion of Cygnus's influence across the star system. Lyra half listened, having heard similar speeches countless times before. The first indication that something was wrong came when Kalen's breathing pattern changed. Lyra glanced back to see him scanning the crowd with greater intensity, his muscles tensing beneath the tailored clothing. The second indication was the subtle shift in the security personnel's formation near her father. The third was the neural suppressor at Kalen's throat. A tiny light that should have been steady green was now flashing amber. Before Lyra could process these observations, the grand windows shattered inward. Dark-clad figures rappelled through the openings, weapons already firing. Guests screamed and dove for cover as security forces returned fire, energy bolts slicing through the elegant space. Lyra froze, watching in horror as a beam of focused energy cut through the air directly toward her father. Time seemed to slow. Then she was falling, strong hands shoving her roughly to the ground as a voice, deep, accented, and definitely not supposed to be functional, shouted in her ear, "Stay down." Kalen had moved with startling speed, pushing her clear of the energy beam. Now he was in motion again, vaulting over an overturned table and disarming a security officer with efficient brutality. Weapon in hand, he fired 3 precise shots that dropped attacking figures before they could reach the governor. Breach in Sector 7. Commander Forlag's voice cut through the chaos. The Earth specimen is loose. Neutralize it immediately. Lyra struggled to her feet, watching as Kalen dispatched two more attackers with combat skills that clearly exceeded standard military training. He was making his way toward the governor, to protect him or attack him. She couldn't tell. "Stop!" she cried out, but her voice was lost in the cacophony. A security team converged on Kalen, firing stun blasts that he dodged with preternatural agility. But numbers eventually overwhelmed skill. A blast caught him in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Security forces pounced, restraining him with brutal efficiency. The last thing Lyra saw before being hustled away by her own security detail was Kalen's eyes finding hers across the chaos. In them was something unexpected, not hatred or fear, but determination and recognition. He had saved her life, and now he would likely lose his. The detention level of the governor's residence was rarely used. Most infractions in Upper Cygnus were handled with swift, public punishment to deter others. But the facility existed buried deep beneath the gleaming towers, its existence known only to the governor's inner circle. Lyra had never visited before. The clinical whiteness of the corridors and the absence of decorative elements made it feel like another world entirely from the opulence above. "My lady, this area is restricted," said the security officer stationed outside the high-security containment cell. Lyra fixed him with an imperious stare. "My father wishes me to identify personal belongings that may have been contaminated during the attack." The lie came easily to her lips. "Unless you prefer to explain to him why his direct orders were questioned." The officer hesitated, then stepped aside, activating the door. 10 minutes, my lady." The cell was small and bare, containing only a simple bed and sanitation unit. Kalen sat on the edge of the bed, hands bound by energy restraints. The neural suppressor had been replaced with a heavier model that covered most of his neck and jaw. When the door closed behind her, leaving them alone, Lyra found herself suddenly uncertain. What was she doing here? This man, this creature, was dangerous. He had violated the most fundamental taboo in their society by demonstrating intelligence and autonomy. Yet he had saved her life. "They're going to kill you," she said finally. "Or worse, completely wipe your neural pathways and leave you an empty shell." Kalen's eyes met hers, that same unsettling intelligence evident. He couldn't speak with a new suppressor, but his gaze communicated volumes. "Why did you save me?" she demanded. "You could have escaped in the chaos." He tilted his head slightly, and Lyra had the distinct impression he was measuring his response, even without words. On impulse, she stepped closer, examining the suppressor. Its control panel was sealed, but she recognized the manufacturer's signature. Her father's technology division produced most of the control devices on Cygnus. "I could have this deactivated," she said, thinking aloud. "Temporarily. Long enough for you to explain yourself." Kalen remained still, watching her with those unervingly perceptive eyes. "If I help you," she continued, "you have to give me answers. Real ones. Starting with how you broke through the first suppressor's programming." She withdrew a small device from her pocket, an override key she'd stolen from her father's secure drawer. A risk that could end with her own imprisonment if discovered. But the mystery of this creature had become an obsession she couldn't ignore. The suppressor clicked and hissed as the key interfaced with it, temporarily creating a narrow communication window without fully deactivating the security features. "Speak quickly," she instructed. "The override only lasts minutes before security protocols reinitiate." Kalen's first words were rough, his voice hoarse from disuse. "It wasn't me who disabled it. Your father's enemies did, remotely. They expected me to help them assassinate him." His accent was strange, clipped and precise in a way she'd never heard before. "Then why didn't you?" Lyra asked. "Because that would have made me exactly what they believe I am, a mindless weapon to be pointed and fired." His eyes held hers steadily. "And because they would have killed you too, daughter of Volantis. You know who I am. Everyone knows the governor's daughter." The neural suppressor blocks speech and complex action, not observation or thought. His jaw worked as if testing the temporary freedom. I am not what you think I am. What are you then? Lyra challenged. My name is Kalen Rex, and I am the rightful heir to the throne your ancestors stole from mine. The suppressor hummed as its systems began to reactivate. Kalen grimaced but continued quickly. Your father's regime rewrote history. My people weren't conquered. We were betrayed. The Volantis line were our trusted generals who staged a coup and then claimed we were savages from another world to justify their rule. That's absurd, Lyra scoffed, though uncertainty flickered within her. Earth is a primitive world. Everyone knows. I've never been to Earth, Kalen said as the suppressor's lights shifted from orange back to green. Neither have any of my ancestors for 10 generations. We are Signians, same as you. The suppressor fully reactivated, silencing him. But the damage was done. In Lyra's mind, a seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next week, Lyra used every resource at her disposal to keep Kalen from execution or neural wiping. She convinced her father that studying the specimen might reveal valuable intelligence about the resistance movements. She bribed security officers to falsify behavioral reports. She even feigned illness to delay the governor's decision on the specimen's fate. Meanwhile, she began a clandestine investigation. The official histories of Cygnus X-7 were readily available, of course. Tales of the glorious Volantis explorers who discovered and civilized the system, bringing order to chaotic alien worlds. She had learned them as a child, reciting the achievements of her ancestors for approving tutors. But now she sought deeper knowledge, accessing restricted archives with her father's security credentials while he attended governmental functions. What she found were inconsistencies, gaps in the historical record, unexplained shifts in terminology, and most damning of all, purged files with fragments of information that contradicted the official narrative. In one ancient text, she found reference to the last Rex monarch, who perished defending the old capital against necessary restructuring of power. The date aligned with the supposed first contact with Earth in the official histories. Late at night, after the residents had quieted, she would visit Kalen in his cell. Using the stolen override key, she granted him brief periods of speech, learning more of his version of history. He spoke of a Signian civilization that had existed for thousands of years before the Volantis coup, of a society once more egalitarian than the current regime, and of a resistance movement that had preserved the truth through generations of oppression. Why should I believe you? She asked during one such visit. You could be manipulating me to save yourself. You've seen the inconsistencies in your own archives, he replied. But if you need more proof, there is something your father keeps in his private vault. The Star Crown, a relic of my dynasty. He cannot destroy it because it contains quantum-locked data that would broadcast the truth to all of Cygnus if tampered with. But he keeps it hidden as a trophy of his family's betrayal. The idea was preposterous. Yet Lyra had indeed heard whispers of a secured vault beneath her father's personal chambers, a place none were permitted to enter. Even if what you say is true, she said, what difference does it make now? The past is past. Kalen's eyes flashed with intensity. The past shapes the present. Your father's regime maintains power through the neural suppressors and genetic modifications that keep the lower classes compliant. The technology was never meant for pets. It was developed to control an entire population. The truth would shatter that control. The suppressor beeped a warning that the override was ending. Kalen leaned forward, speaking urgently. The assassination attempt wasn't random. The resistance knew I was captured. They tried to create chaos to free me. They'll try again, and next time, more will die, including, perhaps, your father. Unless you help me. The suppressor reactivated fully, cutting off further conversation. But Lyra left the detention level with her mind racing. She was a daughter of Volantis, raised in privilege and power. Yet something about Kalen's words resonated with doubts she'd harbored her entire life. Doubts about the strict hierarchy of Signian society, about her father's ruthless governance, about the emptiness behind the gleaming facade of their world. She made her decision that night. Whether Kalen spoke truth or lies, she would discover for herself. And if it meant breaking into her father's most sacred vault, then so be it. The governor's private vault lay behind his personal quarters, protected by biometric scanners calibrated exclusively to his genetic signature. But Lyra shared half his DNA, and she had observed his security protocols for years. She knew that between the hours of midnight and dawn, while he slept, the system performed automated maintenance that briefly reduced its sensitivity. She made her move during one such interval, using a genetic masker, an illegal device she'd acquired through the same black market channels that had brought her Kalen, to amplify the Volantis markers in her genetic makeup. For 60 seconds, she held her breath as the scanner analyzed her altered DNA signature. The vault door slid open with a pneumatic hiss. Inside was smaller than she'd imagined, its walls lined with artifacts she recognized from conquered worlds, or what she had been told were conquered worlds. If Kalen spoke true, these might be treasures looted from Cygnus's own past. In the center, on a pedestal bathed in soft light, rested what could only be the star crown. Unlike the ostentatious regalia her father wore at state functions, this was a simple circlet of dark metal inset with crystalline structures that caught the light in impossible ways, refracting it into patterns that seemed to move with purpose. When Lyra lifted it, the crown felt impossibly light, as though it might float away if she released it. More surprising was the warmth it emitted, not from an external power source, but seemingly from within the material itself. As she turned to leave, her eye caught a data terminal embedded in the vault wall. Acting on instinct, she placed the crown near its scanner. The terminal immediately activated, displaying information in a script she didn't recognize, yet somehow understood, the meaning filtering into her consciousness as if the crown itself were translating. Historical records, genetic lineages, governance protocols from the Rex dynasty, and most damning of all, detailed accounts of the Volantis betrayal, not against alien savages, but against their own people, their own monarchs who had trusted them as protectors. She had seen enough. Carefully returning the crown to its pedestal, she couldn't risk its absence being discovered. Lyra copied as much data as she could to a portable device and slipped out of the vault. Her next visit to Kalen's cell carried a different energy. When she activated the override on his suppressor, she didn't waste time with questions. "I saw it," she said without preamble. "The star crown, and the records it contained." Kalen's expression remained controlled, but she detected a flicker of hope in his eyes. "Then you know I spoke the truth." "I know that something has been hidden," she corrected. "But that doesn't mean I'm ready to betray my father or my family name based on ancient history." "It's not just history," Kalen replied urgently. "The oppression continues. While you live in luxury in the upper city, millions suffer below. The neural technology that controls me is used to subdue anyone who questions the regime. Your father's scientists are developing even more invasive methods of control." "What would you have me do?" Lyra demanded. "Help you escape? Become a traitor to everything I've known?" "I would have you see the truth with your own eyes," he said simply. "Not just in records, but in the world outside your golden cage. After that, make your choice." The suppressor beeped its warning. Kalen's time to speak was ending. "The resistance will make another attempt soon," he said quickly. "When they do, be ready. If you decide to help me, I can stop the bloodshed. If not," his jaw tightened as the suppressor reactivated, silencing him once more. Lyra left the detention level with her thoughts in turmoil. That night, she didn't return to her luxurious quarters. Instead, disguised in the plain clothing of a service worker, she slipped out of the governor's residence and descended to the lower city. Not to the markets she occasionally visited for exotic purchases, but deeper to the industrial sectors where Cygnus's labor force toiled. What she witnessed shook her to her core. Workers with simplified neural suppressors that left them just enough cognition to perform their tasks, but stripped them of creativity or dissent. Children born into service, their genetic material modified before birth to enhance obedience and limit intellectual growth. Living conditions so cramped and polluted that respiratory ailments were considered normal. And throughout it all, the watchful eyes of security forces led by Commander Forlag, her father's most trusted enforcer. When dawn broke, Lyra returned to the upper city with new resolve. The resistance would make their move, Kaelin had said. When they did, she would be ready, not to stop them, but to help them, and to ensure that whatever happened, the truth would finally emerge from the shadows. 3 days later, the opportunity came. An alert sounded throughout the governor's residence. A security breach in the lower levels. Standard procedure called for all family members to relocate to the secure bunker until the threat was neutralized. Instead, Lyra slipped away from her security detail in the confusion and made her way to the detention level. The guards were gone, called to reinforce other sectors. Using her override key, she released the lock on Kaelin's cell and deactivated his restraints. "I've made my choice," she said, removing the portable data device from her pocket. "This contains everything I copied from the vault, including specifications for all the neural suppressor models. Take it." Kaelin rubbed his wrists where the restraints had left marks. "And the star crown? Still in the vault. I couldn't remove it without alerting security, but we can recover it during the confusion." She withdrew a small tool and motioned him to turn around. "Hold still. I'm going to remove the suppressor." The device clicked and fell away from his neck, revealing pale skin beneath. Kaelin took a deep breath, his first with complete neural freedom in months. "We need to move quickly," Lyra continued, retrieving a weapon from a security locker and offering it to him. "The resistance fighters are creating a diversion on the east side, but it won't last long." Kaelin accepted the weapon, checking its charge. "You've changed considerably since I first arrived as your new pet." There was something in his tone, a mixture of respect and something else, that made Lyra pause. "I'm still figuring out who I am without the lies." "We all are," he replied simply. "Let's go." Navigating the residence during a security alert proved more challenging than Lyra had anticipated. Patrols crisscrossed their path, forcing them to take circuitous routes through service corridors and maintenance shafts. Kaelin moved, with surprising familiarity, through the complex. "You seem to know your way around," Lyra observed as they crouched in a ventilation junction, waiting for a patrol to pass. "The Resistance has had informants in the residence for years," he explained. "We've studied the layout extensively for this moment." When they finally reached the corridor leading to the governor's private chambers, they encountered their first real obstacle. Commander Forlag himself, accompanied by 4 elite guards. "Going somewhere, Lady Volantis?" Forlag's voice was cold, and with the specimen, no less. "How very treasonous." "Stand down, Commander," Lyra ordered, falling back on a lifetime of privilege and authority. "My father's rule is built on lies. I've seen the truth." Forlag's laugh held no humor. "Truth? The only truth that matters is power, child. Your father understood that when he sent me to eliminate the last of the Rex bloodline 15 years ago." His gaze shifted to Kaelin. "Though it seems I missed one. An oversight I'll correct today." He raised his weapon, but Kaelin was already in motion, diving forward as energy beams sizzled through the air. Lyra fired her own weapon, forcing 2 guards to take cover while Kaelin engaged Forlag directly. The commander was no ceremonial officer. His combat skills matched Kaelin's, each blow and counterstrike executed with lethal precision. The remaining guards moved to surround them, weapons trained on the combatants, but unable to fire without risking their commander. Lyra used the moment to slip past the firefight, heading for her father's chambers. The vault was her target now, not to steal the Star Crown, but to use it as Kaelin had suggested. The governor's quarters were deserted, his security detail drawn away by the multiple breaches. Lyra moved swiftly to the vault entrance, applying the genetic masker and holding her breath as the scanner analyzed her altered DNA. The door slid open, revealing the Star Crown still resting on its pedestal. But as she reached for it, another voice, one she knew intimately, spoke from behind her. "I always knew your curiosity would be your downfall, daughter." Governor Terrius Volantis stood in the doorway, his ceremonial staff doubling as a deadly energy weapon pointed directly at her heart. "Father," Lyra acknowledged, her hand still extended toward the crown. "Or should I call you usurper?" The governor's expression hardened. Dramatic titles from ancient history have no place in modern governance. The Rex dynasty was weak. Their compassion made them vulnerable. I did what was necessary to advance our civilization. By enslaving your own people, by rewriting history to cast yourself as a hero. I created order from chaos, he retorted. The neural technology saved Cygnus from the factional wars that were tearing it apart. Ask your new friends in the resistance how many civilians died in their last attack. Peace requires control. Not like this, Lyra said, her fingers closing around the star crown. Never like this. She lifted the crown, feeling its strange warmth intensify in her grasp. Her father's eyes widened in alarm. Lyra, stop. You don't understand what that relic can do. But she did understand, at least partly. The ancient data terminal had revealed that the crown contained not just historical records, but a quantum communication system that could override all channels on Cygnus, a failsafe created by the Rex dynasty for times of crisis. She placed it on her head. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Knowledge flooded her consciousness. Generations of history, governance protocols, cultural memories preserved in the crown's crystalline structure. And more importantly, control of the residence's communication systems transferred to her neural patterns, bypassing all security protocols. What have you done? Her father demanded, his weapon still trained on her. Lyra smiled, feeling the crown's power hum through her being. Creating a little transparency, father. Throughout the governor's residence and beyond to the upper and lower cities, every communication screen and public channel suddenly activated. The face that appeared wasn't Lyra's or her father's, but a compilation of historical records showing the true history of Cygnus, the Rex dynasty's peaceful governance, the Volantis betrayal, and the subsequent oppression disguised as salvation. In the corridor, outside, the fighting had reached a stalemate. Kalen and Forelag were both wounded, circling each other warily when the broadcast began. The commander's momentary distraction was all Kalen needed. A swift strike disarmed Forelag, sending him crashing to the floor. It's over, Forelag, Kalen said, the commander's own weapon now pointed at him. Kill him 18, Forelag spat. Prove you know better than us. But Kalen lowered the weapon. That's exactly what I intend to prove. In the vault, the governor had sunk to his knees, watching in horror as decades of careful manipulation unraveled before his eyes. They'll tear the system apart, he whispered. Without control, Cygnus will collapse into anarchy. Or perhaps it will rebuild into something better, Lyra countered, the crown still transmitting its message of truth. The people deserve the chance to try. Security forces throughout the residence were standing down, confused by the revelations and the conflicting commands from their superiors. Resistance fighters who had launched a multi-pronged attack to free Kalen found themselves unexpectedly victorious without the bloodshed they had anticipated. Kalen appeared in the vault doorway, bloodied but alive. His eyes fixed on Lyra wearing the star crown, and for a moment, something like awe crossed his features. The last time the crown was worn, he said softly, was by my grandmother before her execution. Lyra began to remove it, but he raised a hand to stop her. No, it chose you in this moment. That means something. Governor Volantis looked between them, his expression calculating even in defeat. So the heir of Rex and the daughter of Volantis. How poetic. And what now? Summary execution for the traitors? Public tribunals? You'll find ruling requires difficult choices, boy. We're not you, Kalen replied simply. Justice doesn't require cruelty. The aftermath was neither as chaotic as the governor had predicted, nor as simple as Lyra and Kalen might have hoped. The resistance fighters secured the governor's residence, but with minimal violence, Kalen's direct orders. Governor Volantis and Commander Forelag were detained, not executed, to face a public accounting for their actions. More challenging was the withdrawal of neural suppression technology from Cygnus's population. The process had to be gradual to prevent neural shock in those who had lived under suppression for years or generations. Medical teams worked around the clock, using the information from Lyra's data device to safely reverse the effects. 3 months after what was already being called the Revelation, a provisional council gathered in the former governor's audience chamber. Representatives from both the upper and lower cities sat together, unimaginable under the previous regime. Lyra entered without the star crown, having returned it to its place in the vault until a more permanent memorial could be established. Kalen waited for her at the council table, his expression grave. The eastern districts are still resistant to the changes, he informed her as she took her seat. Too many there benefited from the old system. They're calling for your father's release and a return to stability. In the lower industrial sectors, adjusting but struggling with their new freedom, neural withdrawal symptoms are causing work disruptions. Dr. Celine reports they need more medical supplies. Lyra nodded, making notes. The transition was proving more difficult than either of them had anticipated. Freedom, they were learning, came with complications that control had masked. The council meeting was lengthy and sometimes contentious. Representatives from the former elite argued for maintaining certain privileges, while those from the lower classes demanded immediate redistribution of resources. Kalen mediated with surprising diplomacy, finding compromises that nudged Cygnus toward a more equitable structure without triggering open conflict. Later, as artificial night fell over the city, a holdover from Earth rhythms that had become tradition on Cygnus, Lyra found Kalen on the residence's observation deck, looking out over the glittering sprawl below. "You did well today," she said, joining him at the railing. "As did you." He glanced at her with a hint of a smile. The former pet owner arguing passionately for educational access for service-class children. "You continue to surprise me, Lyra Volantis." "I'm trying to make amends for my family's crimes," she replied, her gaze fixed on the lower city, where the lights were dimmer but more numerous. "I'm not sure it's possible." "It isn't," Kalen said bluntly. "Not completely. Some wounds never heal fully. But we can create a system where those crimes couldn't happen again." They stood in companionable silence for a while, the gulf between their backgrounds both ever-present and increasingly irrelevant. "What will happen to my father?" Lyra asked eventually. It was the first time she'd raised the question since his detention. Kalen considered his answer carefully. "The council will vote next week. Execution has been ruled out. We won't begin a new era with the same brutality that marked the old one. Exile is most likely." Lyra nodded, a complex mix of emotions coursing through her. Relief, sorrow, lingering loyalty, and shame. The man who had raised her was also the architect of generations of suffering. Both truths existed simultaneously in her heart. "I understand," she said finally, "and I won't interfere with the council's decision." Kalen touched her shoulder lightly, a gesture that would have been unthinkable months ago when he was her pet. "Your father's crimes aren't yours, Lyra. You chose differently when the moment came." The following weeks brought new challenges. Underground loyalist groups launched small-scale attacks against council facilities. Former elites attempted to bribe their way back into power. Some workers, freed from neural suppression but lacking education or opportunity, turned to crime or destructive behaviors. Lyra found herself working alongside former resistance fighters, developing educational programs and transition support for those struggling with their new freedom. She repurposed much of her family's wealth to fund medical research on reversing long-term neural damage. Kalen, meanwhile, faced his own trials. Some in the resistance expected him to simply replace the governor's autocracy with his own royal authority. Others distrusted him for working so closely with the daughter of their oppressor. His refusal to execute captured officials from the old regime was seen as weakness by hardliners. 6 months after the revelation, they stood together on a public platform in the central plaza that connected Upper and Lower Cygnus, a space previously restricted to elite citizens, but now open to all. Before them gathered thousands of Cygnians from all social strata, some still uneasy in each other's presence, but united by curiosity about their new provisional leaders. The star crown rested on a pedestal between them, not worn by either, but present as a symbol of their shared commitment to truth. "People of Cygnus," Kalen began, his voice carried by amplifiers throughout the plaza and beyond to those watching on communication screens. We stand at a crossroads. Behind us lies a past built on deception and control. Before us, a future we must shape together. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Approval from some, skepticism from others. The Rex dynasty once ruled Cygnus, he continued, but I do not claim that throne by birthright alone. The old ways of governance, whether Rex or Volantis, belong to history. Instead, I ask for your trust in building something new, a council of representatives chosen by all Cygnians, not just the elite. Lyra stepped forward to stand beside him. For generations, my family maintained power by dividing our people. Upper from lower, human from pet, privilege from servant. Those divisions end today. She gestured to the star crown. This relic carries the true history of Cygnus, but more importantly, it represents our shared future. It will be housed in a new memorial hall where all citizens can learn our unaltered history and contribute to our collective memory. Attention ran through the crowd. This was more radical than many had expected. Some former elites turned and left in protest. Others leaned forward, hope cautiously dawning on faces long trained to show no emotion. The transition will not be easy, Kalen acknowledged. Freedom never is. But together, we can build a Cygnus where status comes not from collecting living possessions or neural dominance, but from contribution to our shared society. As they concluded their address, uncertainty hung in the air. Revolution was one thing. Rebuilding was another altogether. But as Lyra looked out over the gathered faces, she saw something she'd rarely encountered in her previous life: genuine possibility. The path forward would be challenging. Former enemies would need to work together. Trust would have to be rebuilt from ashes. The damage of generations couldn't be undone quickly or painlessly. But as she stood beside Kalen, no longer his owner, nor he her pet, Lyra felt a sense of purpose that all her previous privilege had never provided. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had sought a unique pet to relieve her boredom, and instead found a cause that would demand everything she had to give. That evening, after the crowds had dispersed and the council members returned to their various duties, Lyra and Kalen walked alone through the former governor's gardens, now reopened as a public park. Workers were already removing the more ostentatious statues and water features, replacing them with native Cygnian plants long suppressed as primitive by the regime. "Do you think it will work?" Lyra asked, watching a family from the lower city tentatively, exploring the grounds, their children running ahead with unrestrained excitement. Kalen considered the question with characteristic thoroughness. History suggests that revolutions often fail their ideals. Power corrupts, even those with the best intentions. He paused, watching the children play. But I've never seen a revolution like this one, built on truth rather than new lies, seeking balance rather than simple reversal of fortunes. That's not exactly reassuring, Lyra observed with a small smile. Would you prefer a comfortable lie? He raised an eyebrow. We've had enough of those to last generations. They continued walking in comfortable silence, their steps eventually leading them to a secluded viewpoint overlooking both Upper and Lower Cygnus. The artificial twilight painted the city in shades of purple and gold, softening the still stark divisions between the gleaming towers and the industrial sectors. When I was first captured, Kalen said suddenly, I hated everything about you. Your privilege, your casual cruelty, your complete blindness to the reality of those beneath you. Lyra didn't flinch from the assessment. You had every reason to. Yet here we are. He turned to face her fully. You risked everything to expose the truth, even though it destroyed your world. Perhaps I was ready for my world to be destroyed, she replied thoughtfully. There was nothing real in it. Not the people, not the relationships, not even the pets we collected. Everything was designed, controlled, artificially perfect. And now everything is messy and difficult and frightening. She smiled genuinely, and more alive than I ever imagined possible. The moment between them lengthened, charged with possibilities neither had fully acknowledged during the chaotic months of revolution and rebuilding. They had moved from owner and possession to reluctant allies to trusted partners. What might come next remained uncharted territory. A communication alert interrupted the moment. Kalen checked the message, his expression shifting to concern. The medical center in the Eastern District is reporting resistance to the neural recalibration teams. Former security forces are blocking access. Lyra straightened, already calculating the fastest route. We should go. Together, Kalen agreed, and the simple word carried layers of meaning that transcended their immediate crisis. As they hurried toward the transport pad, Lyra reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here. She had wanted a pet, something exotic and dangerous to relieve her boredom. Instead, she found a partner who had shown her the truth about her world and herself. And together, they faced the long, difficult work of healing a society that had been defined by the relationship between master and possession for generations. The path would not be easy or straight. There would be setbacks and resistance, violence and regression. The wounds of history couldn't be erased by good intentions alone. But as she glanced at Kalen, once her pet, now her equal, and perhaps something more, Lyra felt certain of one thing. Whatever came next would be real. And that reality, with all its complications and challenges, was worth fighting for. The transport hummed beneath them as they sped toward the latest crisis, the first of many they would face together. Behind them, the artificial night fell completely over Cygnus, but for the first time in generations, its darkness contained the promise of a genuine dawn.